Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor told me this morning that he is determined at some point to bring down taxes, and I guess he'll want to do that before the next election. There's a lot of talk about, for example, cuts in inheritance tax. If they were to do that, would you maintain that?
Well, it's great to be on your show, Trevor. Let's see what they do next week. But we are in the middle of a massive cost of living crisis. And cutting inheritance tax, which benefits less than 4% of estates each year, that seems an unusual way to tackle the scale of the cost of living crisis that we have right now. On the other hand, I make no apology for wanting taxes on working people to be lower. Ever since Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, tried to raise national insurance, I said that was the wrong approach, especially when people are struggling with rising bills, rising food prices, etc. And so this government, since 2019, have raised taxes 25 times. We've now have the highest tax burden in 70 years. And so lower taxes on working people, if the government can explain where the money's going to come from, that is something that I would support.
So you're with Michael Gove when he says that really the priority for, if you've got some headroom, would be to cut taxes on... cut national insurance and cut taxes on earned income. Well, so if the Chancellor actually did what Mr Gove wants, you'd be OK with that?
Well, a couple of years ago, Rishi Sunak was trying to increase national insurance. We opposed that and said that we wanted working people to have more of their own money in their pockets. I've also always said, though, that it's important to say where the money's going to come from. Last year, when the Conservatives had a load of unfunded tax cuts, it crashed the economy, sent mortgage rates soaring. So I want taxes on working people to be lower, but it has to be affordable. And we'll see from the Office for Budget Responsibility next week what headroom the Chancellor has.
All right, well, let's talk about this spending thing. What you've been saying pretty consistently is that, as far as you know, you will have to stick with the Conservatives' spending plans. That's still where you are today, is it?
Well, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I would inherit if I had the fortune to become Chancellor of the Exchequer after the next election. Growth is on the floor, debt is 100% of GDP, and we have a cost of living crisis that most of us have never experienced in our lifetimes. But I also recognise the desperate need in our public services for more money. I think the sustainable way to get that money is to grow the economy, but we also need money right now. And so it's why I've said Labour would get rid of the non-dom tax status.
Yeah.
£2 billion every single year.
Yeah, but
and we would put that money into our National Health Service for more operations and scans and appointments.
You've committed that in various ways, but frankly, in an economy that's worth trillions, it's marginal. The basic point is that you have said that you're going to stick with the Conservatives' spending plans. What Mr Hunt said is that he plans to increase day-to-day public spending by 1% every year after 2024. Is that where you're going to be too?
Well, we haven't committed to the Conservative spending plans. I've just given you one example, that we would get rid of the non-dom tax status and use that money for our health service and breakfast clubs at schools. We've also said, Trevor, as you know, that the tax breaks that private schools get, no VAT, no business rates, those tax breaks would go and we would put that money into our state schools. So there's just a couple of examples of how we would inject more money into our public services straight away. But the key plank of our economic policy is to grow the economy, because these last 13 years...
Mr Hunt says that too.
Well, wait a second. But they haven't delivered it. But this is the difference, Trevor. This is the difference.
What you've given me are examples...
because this is very important.
I understand, but you're giving me examples where you would change things by a few billion a year. Public spending is what, running now 400 billion or something like that? These are small changes. What I'm asking you is, will you stick with the broad spending plans that the Conservatives have set out or not?
Well, I've already given you a couple of examples. There's also the changes to private equity tax, the way that bonuses are treated for private equity managers. And we would put all of that money into our public services. But the key difference between Labour's plans and the Conservatives' plans is that we have a serious plan to grow our economy. The economy these last 13 years has grown on average by 1.5% a year. When Labour was last in power, the economy grew on average by 2% a year. If the economy these last 13 years had grown at 2% a year, that'd be £150 billion more in our economy for public services, for lower taxes than what we have today. And so our reforms to the planning system, our modern industrial strategy, our National Wealth Fund to invest alongside businesses in the opportunities for growth in the future are all about securing that sustainable growth that enables you to keep taxes low and have money to invest in our public services.
But look, you're telling me all of the things that you'd like to see happen. I'm not quite hearing how it's going to happen and the scale of what needs to happen. Hunt says he's going to increase the real term spending by 1%. But that in itself, and they've acknowledged this, involves serious cuts to public services. Now, if you don't want to inherit those cuts, you're going to be talking about quite significant increases in public spending. Is that what you're now telling me you want to do?
Well, we've got those short-term increases in non-dom tax and the private schools business rates and VAT to put money, inject money straight away in our public services. And then it's about growing the economy, Trevor. Then it's about growing the economy. So reforms to the pension system to get more money.
You're hoping for growth?
We've got plans for growth. And don't just take my word for it. Listen to what businesses say about Labour's plans. They endorsed many of the proposals we put forward at conference to bring back housing targets, to reform how we invest in nationally significant infrastructure, to reform the pension system to get more money into growing businesses, the modern industrial strategy working alongside business. If we do those things, we can grow the economy and have money for our public services.
Let me take one example of what you've just said, which is about housing. And you're saying this weekend that you're going to reduce the mortgage costs by increasing housing stock, building 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament. That is 300,000 homes a year. The last time this country built more than 300,000 homes was 1977. The last time we built more than 200,000 homes in consecutive years was 2006 and 2007. Just explain to me what you are going to do that Healey, Howe, Clark, Lawson, Lamont and Brown never managed to do.
Well, actually, those examples show that it is possible when the political will
but most of
is
the time,
there.
For 40 years, none of your predecessors, as you hope, if you're a chancellor, managed to do it. What are you going to do that they didn't?
Well, we're going to unlock the planning system to make it easier for builders to build, bring back the housing targets, which the Conservatives got rid of,
but
create those new
doesn't get
towns.
houses built.
Well, it does, because if you say to local authorities, this is the number of houses that you need to build in your area per year, then you get that...
and you're going to give them the money to do that, are you?
Well, builders want to build. This is not about the government putting a load of money in. Builders want to build, and Labour want to back the builders, not the blockers, because we have got home ownership now falling. Conservatives used to be the party of home ownership. It's Labour now that is the party of home ownership. We want more young people and families to get on the housing ladder, and unless we bring back those housing targets and allow builders to build like they want to do, then we're not going to be able to help people fulfil their dreams and aspirations, and that's what I'm determined to do.
This is very interesting. I looked at your conference speech, and here's what you said. You said, we will take on our antiquated planning system. You talked about the fact that decision times have increased by 65%, and you're going to change that. How are you going to change that? Are you going to reduce the opportunities for people to object to development? Are you going to build on green belt? What are you actually going to do to deliver this 300,000? And reform the planning system is a nice ambition, but what does it actually mean? Yeah,
so we want to reform the planning system, not just for housing. That example about taking 65% longer is for national significant infrastructure, like energy infrastructure, like rail, like roads. But both of these things are hugely important because they are holding back growth. So on housing, we will bring back the targets, like I have said.
How are you going to speed up planning? How are you going to speed up the building of houses?
Yeah, so we'll bring back the targets. We will reduce the litigation opportunities because at the moment things are held back through the planning system by giving more guidance to local authorities. We'll bring more planners into the system and we will pay for that by having a higher rate of stamp duty on the purchase of properties by foreign owners because we think that housing should be a home first, not an asset. And we would use that money so that we can more speedily slowly get things through the planning system. And those changes will unlock investment. And don't take my word for it, Trevor. Listen to what the House builders said about Labour's plans that we announced at conference. They welcomed those plans because they see it as an opportunity
I think
to
they welcome your
unblock the planning
ambition,
system.
but they're still asking how you're going to do it. But let's just talk about some of the other things you might do. Now, I'm not going to ask you about what you're going to do about taxes and so on, because I know what you'll say is, we don't know, we'll have to decide when we arrive here.
Well, I said right at the beginning, I would like taxes on working people to be lower. They're too high today. It's contributed to the cost of living crisis that we've got higher mortgages, higher rents, higher energy prices and higher taxes. That's all eroding people's spending power. So that is a principle for me.
I get all that. But let me ask you this. When in 1997, Mr. Brown became Chancellor, they had a series of ideas which didn't mean huge amounts of government spending, but which, in a sense, came to define what that Labour government was about. Bank of England independence, the minimum wage, Human Rights Act, and we knew about at least two of those before the election. And all three are still in place today. What are the Rachel Reeves cost-neutral reforms that we're going to see?
Well, of course, I worked at the Bank of England in those early years, the Bank of England independence, and saw the difference it made to economic policy and economic stability in this country. I also want to ensure and build on that economic stability, which is why last week in Parliament we forced a vote on a new charter for budget responsibility. We lost that vote, but it's something we would bring forward in government, and that's to strengthen the powers of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. Last year, the Tories overrode...
So you're going to tie your hands to some unelected people, are you?
Well, of course, the Bank of England is unelected as well, but it's because it's unelected that they're able to make those long-term decisions in the national interest, delegating to experts, and I do believe that experts have an important role in our economic framework. And the Charter for Budget Responsibility would mean that never again can a Conservative or a Labour government override the Office of Budget Responsibility and not allow them to do a forecast, because when you play fast and loose with the public finances, it is the family finances of ordinary working people that are hit, and I will never allow that to happen again, and we will legislate for that in government.
All right, Labour has been having its internal arguments about Gaza, ceasefire and all of that. I want to ask you about a particular aspect of this. Last week we saw the office of the Labour MP Rushanara Ali pretty much besieged by pro-Palestinian protesters. Saw something similar at Keir Starmer's own constituency office. Is this a reasonable exercise of free expression, or is this becoming old-fashioned bullying?
I believe in the right to protest. I don't believe in the right to intimidate. And some of those protests, I believe, over the last few days, have crossed the line from protest to intimidation. Protesting outside people's homes, putting pressure on them in that way, I think it's totally unacceptable. In a democracy, we elect our MPs and they make decisions. They represent their constituents, but they also listen to all of the evidence. And anything that would attempt to intimidate an MP to vote in a certain way or to put pressure on them, it is anti-democratic, in my view. And I know that the police and the House of Commons authorities are doing everything that they can to keep members of Parliament safe. But it does hugely concern me what we're seeing at the moment. And one of my worries is that good people get put off politics because they don't want to put their families through what we're seeing at the moment. And that would be a real loss to our politics if good people were deterred from going into it. So I would urge those people who are conducting those protests, I understand why you call for a ceasefire, but do things in a responsible way and don't intimidate or put pressure in that way on elected representatives, or anyone else for that matter.